So one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I was curious when I was reading about the movie being made, is that your original title for this was Dreamland, right?
Yeah.
But there's like 7 movies named Dreamland.
Yeah.
But I was wondering
There
if,
weren't at the time, but
yeah,
they emerged. Yeah.
I was wondering if that was related at all to the book Dreamland, because I read that book actually after hearing that you had signed on to the movie, because I was a big fan of Arbitrage, and then
Oh, thank you.
when I heard that you were doing Dreamland and it was about the opioid crisis, I assumed it was about Sam Quiones' book, and I was
No, it was unrelated. It was a title I had for a long time, and I've been thinking about. Originally, I think the title might have even been Dreams,
mhm.
and then I sort of went through a bunch of titles, and that was a working title. And then once we found out that there were all these other movies, and then the book, we just started thinking about what's another title, and then I mean the whole process of title selection is kind of fascinating. I actually went out and tested titles.
Mhm.
Um, then I ignored some of the research. I mean, I had another title that nobody liked at all. Universal Pictures liked, which was Pharma, but
No.
everyone hated that title in the tests. But Crisis felt fitting somehow. I like these one-word titles. I always have, Arbitrage. Um, I thought it was powerful, and I had, I was then when I was like, oh God, now this one's going to be in use. But that hadn't been used since a Cary Grant movie since 1950 or something.
Mhm.
So it seemed like a good kind. I could see it was graphic too. I could see that those letters could be very powerful.
Well, I mean, it's very apt because I mean that is, I guess, what we're in. So one of the things that was interesting though for me as a Montrealer is that a lot of the movie takes place here, and by our viewers are all American probably, but JoBlo itself is kind of the origins of the cider from Montreal. And the main villain in the movie, I have to ask, was he based on Mom Boucher?
Well, okay, so this, you're very perceptive.
My father, no, because
Uh,
my father was a cop when all this was happening, and he was involved in the Calcageux, which was called the Wolverine. That's French for Wolverine, right? And that was the squad that was going after the bikers during the biker wars in the 90s.
yes, I mean, I read a tremendous amount about that. There was just some wonderful books that I came across,
Hmm.
uh, really about what was the life of a trafficker like.
Hmm.
And so now look, I didn't model the character on Mom Boucher, but certainly I was aware of him and found him to be a fascinating figure. And then I was advised, don't ever say that you modeled it on Mom Boucher because he'll find out a way to kill you from prison. Uh, but what I liked about Boucher, I think, was that he had a daughter or something, and she got he was a family man in addition
Yeah.
to being an importer. So I would say, certainly there was some inspirations there. I mean, also, I've been friendly for many years with Billy Friedkin, and a huge fan and disciple of his, and
Yeah, we're
so
big
um,
fans of his here too.
yeah, I mean, one can't help but think of Charnier
Yeah, yeah.
from French Connection, and
Sure.
that's definitely an inspiration there. But I was so lucky to find Guy Nadon,
Hmm.
who is an incredible actor, and so he really, inhabited the role for me in a way that I couldn't necessarily have imagined because I met with pretty much every top French actor. I don't want to name names, but the top of the top wanted to do the part, and I was very close on another guy who was, in a way much more suave and handsome and, kind of movie star-ish. And then I met Guy, and he was actually recommended to me by Eric Bruneau, who plays his number two,
Hmm.
uh, named Guy in the movie. And they had done either some Shakespeare or some Royal Theater production together or something, because they're great trained stage actors. And I was like, I can't find anyone to play Mother. And he was like, "What? Did you talk to Guy Nadon?" I'm like, "Who's Guy Nadon?" I didn't know because it's a whole other world of cinema there. And
Yeah,
he was
it's
like, "Well, you
strange.
have to meet him." Yeah. And then he came in and we met up in the lobby of the St. James Hotel, I think, and we just instantly had a kinship. And it was funny. Then you unfortunately when you're making a film, you got to get into negotiations with people about what are they going to get paid and what are they get. And so the casting director had made some suggestion to. He doesn't even have an agent. His daughter does everything for him.
Mhm.
And uh and so and so they came back and it wasn't enough. And basically, like, he just, the way he negotiated was so gangster. He was just like, it's very amusing, your proposal, I'm going to have to decline. Once you grow up and decide to understand what certain actors should be compensated, perhaps we might have another conversation. And I wish you all the best. He
Interesting.
was so funny. I was like, pay him whatever he wants. Get Dina done.
Yeah.
So luckily we were able to make it work. And he came and joined us. But I think somebody I had showed the movie to early on, a friend of mine, and he said, he's so alive behind the eyes, that actor. And I thought, because it's kind of a role that could veer into, obviously we've seen these crime boss type figures before in movies, but he does it with a humor and a kind of, fierceness at the same time that I really thought suited the character well. So whether it's Boucher or whether it's Guy, who knows who it is.
So I also have to ask, so Gary Oldman, how did he end up being attached to the project? Was he somebody you'd always kind of courted for the part? Because I mean, it feels like when you get Gary Oldman, you kind of luck out, right?
Well, I mean, look, Gary was actually the first person to join the project. And
So his
so, and
agent was one of the producers, or Doug Urbanski, right?
yeah, his manager and Gary himself was the producer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're a team. And so it turned out I had met Gary. I knew his agent, Jim Osborne.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim said, he was a fan of the idea of me working with Gary. And so I had another script, a historical thriller about early terrorism in America. And so this was right around the time of Darkest Hour. And he said, well, Gary's going to be we're having this party tonight for Darkest Hour at the Chateau. Why don't you come by and I'll introduce you? And so I had sent the script at that point, and I went by and I met him, and he was kind of in a receiving line. But he was so kind, and he took a few minutes to talk with me, and he was like, yes, I've seen Arbitrage, and I really thought that was one of Gere's finest moments and a fine film. And he's like, I understand you have this thing. And meanwhile, Leonardo DiCaprio was like standing over there, like waiting to talk to Gary.
Yeah.
And Gary's spending time talking to me, and I'm like, this is kind of mind blowing. So he said, I'll never forget, he said to me, he's like, okay, well, I have the script. He's like, thank you for the opportunity to be considered.
Wow.
And I was just like, huh? Yeah. Like, I'm some filmmaker, hat in hand, like, this is Gary Oldman. This is empowering, but he was so cool, and that really was not an act. That's who he is. And so we started working on that, and it was a big project. We need a lot of money, maybe we'll do it one day. But then in the meantime, the opioid thing really was coming to the fore, and I had lost some friends to the problem. And I had a friend who was involved with it at that time. It was really interfering with her life. Yeah. So it was an idea that I had for a long time, but then I started writing it, and we were a little frustrated knocking around with the historical project just because we needed so much money. And then so I brought him the Crisis, and I said, what do you think about this? And he sort of instantly said, boom, okay, let's just do this now. We'll do the other thing, but we got to go on this. This is killing our friends and family. I know all about this. I know all about addiction. Let me come on. I'll produce it with you. Use my name. Go get the money. Go get the other actors. So he was really the linchpin in the way that Richard Gere had been that for me with Arbitrage. And Al Pacino had been for me earlier in my career. So I seem to have a little bit of luck with these elder statesmen. Who knows why? But he, he remained a great pillar. And the project wasn't easy to get financed. We had to pull every trick in the book, and put together a group of really tremendous supporters for the film. And he kind of stuck with it throughout.
Well, I mean, Evangeline Lilly in the movie is probably the character I think that most people will relate to, especially the ones that had, that have had experience with that themselves, right? I mean, I think, most people that I know, have some experience with drugs, I think, and definitely, most of my friends and me, myself and everything, but it's just, she is probably the emotional core of the film, I think, to some degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, her character was, somebody once said about writing, they said, I think it was Norman Mailer, he said, what is writing? For him, it was experience filtered through the prism of memory. Mm-hmm. And that quote always stayed with me. And so I had a family member whose son was murdered. Mm-hmm. And this is like 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was only 21. And and they knew who the killer was, but he hadn't yet been brought to justice. Ultimately, he did go to prison. But so I remember the stories I would hear from my mother. The woman would drive to the killer's house and sit outside and watch the porch and watch and go, that's the guy who killed my son. And I always thought, did she have a gun in the car? Or what was she going to, and it really, I mean, of course you can imagine it threw her life into a total insanity. So that was a kind of idea that was in my mind. And at the same time, I knew obviously some very high functioning people. As you said, we all know someone
Yeah, sure.
that addiction has touched, whether it's us or whether it's your mother, your father, everybody knows somebody, right? It doesn't discriminate, as Gary Oldman says. So I thought, but I like this idea of the high functioning addict, because I had known people like that who had good jobs or who were
you didn't even know until something happens, and then you're like, oh shit.
Yeah. Can you believe they were covering that, that they had that going on? And so I think, that's where that character came from. And then Evangeline was an actress that I loved forever. I'm not a big TV guy, but I have watched every episode of Lost.
Sure.
And so I was addicted to it like everybody else for whatever reason, but I understood that she was an actress who had tremendous range and tremendous technical capability, because she had played every possible emotion on that show. The scenarios were so crazy. There's an invisible bear coming through the forest. Okay. Oh, your son died. No, it's not your son. It was a fake son, whatever. Right. So I had seen her play, but then also she had kind of, as she said, she felt like, she said in some interview we did, that she felt like her muscles had atrophied dramatically because she didn't do too much dramatic work after Lost.
Yeah.
She did the Ant-Man, and she's very good in that, and I like that movie, but she's a small part in Hurt Locker, but nothing like this. So she really was craving this kind of experience. And I felt like she really fit in with the role well.
I have to ask also about when you do a movie like this too, that's about big pharma and and the dangers of big pharma and the sometimes sinister side of big pharma. I'm sure that there must have been the shadow of the Sacklers over this project to some degree, right?
Well, I don't think this film is not an indictment of any one group. There are,
but they are involved in show business too, though, and they produce movies, and and I feel like there must have been some kind of.
They didn't give us any financing,
no.
I
didn't think so.
But I think listen, I think the Sacklers. I mean, look, everything that could go wrong with this movie did go wrong. So sometimes in my darker moments, I think, boy, there are a bunch of pharmaceutical companies out there trying to hurt us. But I don't think so. I'm not that crazy yet, or that aware. But I think, look, I didn't want to. It's very easy to point the finger at one group and say, or a set of individuals and say, oh, this is all your fault.
Yeah.
And I think I know you enjoyed Arbitrage, and you were kind of mixed in joy on this. So, but I think what I'm up to, is I like to look at a system and say, why is this out of whack? And if so, why? And, my experience has been that it's usually because of a financial incentive of some kind.
Yeah.
So here, I think with the opioids, you had very lax oversight, and you had, with our drug regulatory agency, the FDA. I was very surprised to learn in my research, because I do a tremendous amount of research for these movies, that over 50% of people that work at the FDA end up working at pharmaceutical companies.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's what they call the revolving door, right? So based on that, right, they've got to develop relationships with these companies. Now, does that interfere with proper oversight? I mean, I would suppose that it does. At the same time, you had this big movement to market these pills and to push them towards people for toothache or whatever. We had opioids in America since the Civil War. We had morphine. We gave it to soldiers on the battlefield, but we didn't have millions dying. That's a recent phenomenon. So what we didn't have is we didn't have constant marketing. We didn't have
Yeah.
doctor conferences in the Bahamas. We didn't have sell X pills, win a Cadillac, and we didn't have this pushing of no, it's fine, you're not going to get addicted. And I think when I learned about what certain manufacturers' approach was, I don't think they didn't take the research that showed that the drugs could really just affect people during the initial course of prescription too seriously, or they shared a different perspective, let's say. So I think that's not confined to the Sacklers. There were
No, of course
plenty
not.
of manufacturers.
There's a lot of blame to go around, I'm sure. I mean,
yeah.
So, okay, I have to ask you as well, the shadow, I guess when you said that everything that could go wrong with the project went wrong. I mean, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the Army Hammer situation. And to a degree, I mean, like you said, I was mixed on the film, but I feel for you because I saw the movie before the Army Hammer thing happened. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview was that I felt the pile-on to you guys was really unfair because one person's actions shouldn't have to tarnish the rest of the movie, right? And it seemed that people were, to a certain extent, almost afraid of covering it, right? Because of this, the culture that we find ourselves in nowadays to some degree. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that, because I'm sure that it can't have been easy from coming from where you had this
I mean, look,
relationship.
like I said, we had two actors get sick during the filming. We had to shut down the movie twice. Millions of dollars had to be paid by Chubb Insurance. God bless them, they paid it. Mm-hmm. We had tremendous challenges with weather, and we shot the whole movie in 35, lenses freezing, film getting exposed. I mean, this was, an intense and crazy shoot, right? And we made the movie pretty low budget. The budget's right around the same as Arbitrage, but we got helicopters and chase, right? So I like to stretch a dollar. So that was just all the production, right? Then the editing, the endless testing and refining. And, luckily, like, we felt we were in a good place with the movie. And then we send the movie out and we got some advanced reviews in, and everybody was like, oh, it's great. The opioid, people were really excited. They gave us quotes, put these on the poster, Variety, the masterpiece, whatever. So then all this stuff comes out about Army, so let me just say up front, like, I have a professional relationship with Army.
Sure.
He was very professional during the filming of the movie. I have no idea what he does when he's not in the movie. Because somebody once told me the director is not, your job is not to be a psychologist. Your job is to provide text and to help the actor focus on the text.
Well, and you're not responsible for his behavior either. Nobody is on the set.
No, I mean, nor do we even know what it is, right? So I can't even go into he did this, he did that. I don't know. I really, and nor is it my place to even comment or have an opinion, because otherwise I'm just another tabloidist, right? Mm-hmm. So, obviously there's some allegations, whatever, you take them seriously, check them out, don't, whatever. It's not, it has to exist separate from the film, because also this is an ensemble film, and he's 1/3 of the ensemble. For instance, we had a news organization want to have Gary Oldman on the morning show. Will we answer some questions about Army Hammer? And it's like, Gary Oldman met Army Hammer at a dinner we had the week before shooting. That's it. They're not even in any scenes together. So, so that was frustrating. But look, I get it from the perspective of, some of these news organizations who go, oh my God, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's some individuals are upset with Army. Did he do the wrong thing? Well, what does that mean? Could he be in Weinstein territory? Could it be this? And then if we do any type of coverage, do we look foolish? So we had tons of stuff set up that just evaporated, and then I really had to go into overdrive, promote the movie myself, find people like yourself who are not afraid to cover the film and discuss the film, to help get it out there. Now, in the end, we were successful, and, we performed extremely well commercially. We opened in limited release. We were the #1 independent movie in America. We were the #2 per screen next to Tom and Jerry. We were #1 on iTunes for, I think, 10 days running. We've been in the top 10 on all the cable VOD providers. I mean, to go to #1 iTunes is a pretty big deal for that amount of time. So I think, this was not necessarily surprising to me because I had tested the film. I like to test the film. I had done the big tests and the little tests, and brought all my filmmaker friends in, Taika Waititi and crazy Tony Kaye, and to all help with the editing. And we got to a point where we felt like, hey, we have a pretty satisfying film. We tested the film, and audiences agreed. So I knew audiences liked the picture, and would respond to it. Now, so it was a shame we lost coverage. Look, with the reviews, I'm happy to take criticism anytime. No, I don't claim the film is perfect. I don't think Arbitrage was perfect. But what was a shame was, there were, some reviewers were very good, not just the ones that gave you good reviews, even some of the ones that didn't like it. I prefer a good review, obviously, because these things help promote the film. And I think there's tremendous amount of good work in this film, not just from my filmmaking, but from, many of the performers.
Sure.
But what I saw with the tomatoes of it all was a little bit frustrating. It was like a little bit of a pylon of, you mentioned this, like a pylon effect, where it's like, oh, well, this is the movie that can be beat, and a lot of the criticism contained criticism of Army and the personal thing. So I get it. I think a lot of, people are confused. Do you separate the art from the artist? There's a wonderful young guy. I just like to talk about him at every opportunity because it's so interesting to me. Dom Griffin, the armchair auteur. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's
I don't know. No.
He's a YouTube reviewer. He's a genius, this guy. He did a whole 10-minute piece on the movie on his own called, what happens to the movie when the star is canceled? Yeah. And so it was a whole review of the movie, and he was like, I like the movie, but what does this mean? And then he looked at Woody Allen, he looked at this, and, can you separate the art from the artist? And he came to some fascinating kind of different conclusions. So I recommend anyone to check that piece out. Just because it's a lot of fun, and he's a very talented filmmaker, the way he puts everything together. But look, it is what it is. I think we've definitely continued to do outreach and do publicity with people like yourself, and now I feel like the tide has turned. More love has come in for the film. Scores rising. We're heading into the fresh territory, and I think we're going to continue. We have more countries to roll out. We saw in other countries also, it wasn't the same. Like in Australia, if you had just looked at the Australian reviews, we would have been like 90, So, and whatever, we are in the 60s here. And, when in the hatred period, we were in the 20s, which I was just like, that ain't right.
Well, I mean, that's the problem with Rotten Tomatoes, though, is that they have, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down, fresh or rotten, and there's no, I would say that most movies I see I'm mixed on to some degree, but it's also frustrating for a critic, I think, when they're submitting to Rotten Tomatoes, choosing fresh or rotten. You struggle over that sometimes because it boils down criticism to kind of nothing in the end, right? Because what does it matter in the end if you write a review? Why do I even write 500 words on a movie? What's the point?
Well, what I would say, I think you brought up something really interesting here is, I love film criticism and I love film critics, especially like I loved Cale, Cale and Saris. I mean, these were, titans, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what the problem with Tomatoes is, like everything else, and it's really not an attack on Tomatoes. It's not an attack on anyone on Tomatoes. But the thing is, everything gets reduced to a number. Yeah. And then that number is the public just goes, oh yeah, I shouldn't, but the thing is, I think as a result, there's much lighter analysis of these films, where there was a tradition of kind of richer, like sight and sound and all this kind of like really interesting things that get into the making of the film and get into how they're connected to society and what does it say, and thousands of, I mean, I love looking back at that stuff, like looking at Chinatown or looking at, there was somebody trashed Alan Pakula and maybe it was Bosley Crowther or someone saying he was a conspiracy propagandist, but at least he took some thousands of words to do it, and it was fun to read, and I read that in the AFI library or something. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't have any answers, but I do hope people watch this movie because I think it will entertain them, and they'll come away with some insight on what kind of went on behind the scenes in the opioid.
Yeah, I mean, it is, like I said, I mean, it is unfair that a movie gets tarnished because of the potential actions of one person involved with the movie, whereas there's hundreds of people that are involved in the film and that, you know, deserve to get their work out there. You know, I sympathize with you for that. I feel bad because it should have been, you know, you guys didn't deserve the treatment that you got in the end, I think.
It's all right. Look, you know, it's only a movie, you know, and I think all's well that ends well. We're going in the right place now. Audiences are still discovering the film. We still got, you know, more than half the world to go. And, you know, for me, that's the most important thing, is just that people see it, interact with it. And I love to hear from the audience. I love for people to tweet at me, or, you know, I like making new connections with people like you. You know, I'm all for discussion of our art form. I enjoy all of these questions. And you know, this is what we're here to do. It's funny, you know, I've been to visit Tarantino's set before, and he has this thing when you go there called Checkpoint Charlie. You're not allowed to have a cell phone on the set. So he has a guy who sits there, and you got to put your phone in, and then you know, he's like, okay, well, you know, when and this goes for, you know, DiCaprio, Pacino, whoever, like nobody can have phone. And if, you know, Quentin's asked about it, he's like, this is we're not here to do phone calls. Like, we're here to do movies. You could do your phone call outside. Like, we take this very seriously. We want to make this the best. We want to think about it. We want to be in this special world of film, you know, and that's the world that I like to be in.
I also have to ask you this one last question, if you don't mind. With COVID going on now, it does feel like, you know, movie theaters and such are in jeopardy to some degree. Do you have any feeling as a director about, you know, where you think this is going? Are you somebody who'd be just as happy working on streaming as you would be working, you know, in a traditional model? Just wanted to get your thoughts. It's always interesting to hear, you know, directors' take on this, because everything is changing so quickly, it seems, over the last year. It's remarkable how quickly things have changed.
If you could, can you just give me 1 second? I'm going to answer the question, because I was due somewhere else, but what happened to this person? I don't know. I just want to, oh wait, okay, he's coming. Let me just tell him I'm going to be a few minutes.
No problem.
Sebastian? Good, how are you? I'm about 5-10 minutes behind, so I'm going to call back in about 6 minutes or so, if that's okay. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, thank you. So hold on just 1 second. Let me refocus.
Yeah. It's funny, as we're talking, they just moved Top Gun Maverick a year, right? So everything, right? So everything is getting. So that's why I ask you, because everything is shifting so much, right? The theatrical model, the streaming model, and as a director, I just wanted to know what your take on that was.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, you ask a great question. I grew up, you know, I'm probably a little bit older than you, but you know, I grew up in the age of cinema, right? Mm-hmm. Before streaming and before everything else. So that's what I know, and that's what I had always wanted, was to make a film for the theatrical experience. Now, that has really been changing in the last 15 years. So I got the first taste of this with Arbitrage. You know, we had made, you know, and I shoot these films, I make these films, this and Arbitrage are both shot in 35 millimeter Kodak film. We put them in a big stage. We do the color correction. We do the Dolby sound. And So, I mean, you know, and with Crisis, I mean, you know, it does make a difference, like seeing it 80 feet tall and seeing all this stuff, you know. So, but with Arbitrage, we started out, we kind of pioneered the day and date thing.
Yeah, I remember we said, okay, successful.
Yeah, we went out in 200 theaters, and then we went into the home at the same time, similar to what we did with this picture. And we still hold the record, which I'm hoping to be with this movie, but we'll see, as the highest grossing independent day and date film in the history of movies.
Yeah.
So we did, you know, 8 million at the box office, 15 or 20 million on VOD back then with Arbitrage. And we asked the question, you know, well, does one hurt the other? And so we went and we did these exit surveys at the theater and said, hey, did you know you could get this at home? And some people said, yeah, I knew, but I prefer the theater. People, but no, I didn't know. Well, do you wish you knew? No, I like the theater. Mm-hmm. And then we went to people, you know, who were watched it at home and said, did you know you could see this in the theater? And they said, Oh, I don't like the theater. I'm in a wheelchair. You know what? I just don't like being around. I prefer it in my house. So there are different consumers, right? Now in the pandemic, that obviously really curtailed our ability to get this out theatrically. That we had the performance that we did theatrically was astonishing to me. I think people really wanted to get out of the house.
Yeah.
They want to go to a movie, and this looked like a movie to them that would be something that would be enjoyable and fascinating, and certainly the type of movie that I would like to see in the theater. So I think these forms are still evolving. Yes, I like the theatrical experience, and I hope we don't lose that. That said, I'm currently maybe working on something with a streamer, which indeed is a big budget, complex, another dysfunctional system, this time with the military and helicopters, and we're getting in war zones, and but I mean, if we do that as a streamer, it's interesting because it's such an obviously a big screen cinematic topic.